Okay. Welcome to Rutgers PEP Project. And my name is Ginny Yans, spelled Y-A-N-S. I'm in the history department at Rutgers. The person, Debbie, should not be worried about that. I'd like to introduce Debbie Carr, who's in the front row there. This was her idea to create this program. And she's very industrious and got some money from our administration and formed a committee of people who had either worked in this area or were interested in it. Although I'm a historian, years ago I started using computers before they had the kinds of... We had to use punch cards to analyze data. That's how long ago it was, okay? Stone Age. And over the past 20 years plus, I have done a lot of public program work with museums, including Ellis Island, the Statue of Liberty, which are huge projects. So that's my particular expertise. But the group of us, with Debbie's leadership, devised this series of programs. And today, this is the one I'm most fascinated with, developing an online presence, websites, social media, and blogging for academics, a Rutgers Public Engagement Project, PEP, otherwise known as PEP. And we will be on YouTube if you want to visit again, and there are other panels are also on YouTube, those which have been conducted already, and you can tell your friends about that too. So what we're going to do today is we have some wonderful panelists here, and what I want to do is just introduce them briefly now, but before each person speaks, I will give you a more detailed background on that person. So they will speak for 15 minutes, maybe. One of our panelists had a different kind of technological problem, which was a train breakdown, so he couldn't get here today. But he's going to try and send some of his remarks to us, and we can read them to you. So today we have Mary Chayko is going to go first. Mary. And let me tell you about Mary. These resumes are so impressive. I decided I had to read each one before the person because they're very dense and rich, and I wanted you to be able to get a feeling for each person that's going to be talking. So Mary co-organized with me, although she did most of the work, I have to say, is a sociologist. And she's a perfect example of this sort of cross-disciplinary activity and interest. She's quite an amazing person, I think. She's teaching professor of communication and information at Rutgers School of Communication and Information, director of undergraduate interdisciplinary studies at the school. She was also a professional radio news announcer and a disc jockey for 10 years. She's authored 4 books, including the recently released Super Connected, The Internet, Digital Media, and Techno-Social Life, and many published articles. She has a website called marychayko.com, where I think we're going to try and get a screen up with this information for you if you want to get in touch with some of the panelists, and a blog for her book called superconnectedblog.com that contains professionally produced podcasts to accompany each chapter of her book. Mary is on Twitter at Mary Chayko. You got all bases covered, Mary.
Thanks to all of you for being here today. This is really a pleasure and really fun to get to talk about something that so many of us are doing, but we're not always talking about together in an academic context. So the whole PEP project we think is fantastic. And we have decided, even though there's not too many of us here, we thought we would have a hashtag for this session, and that will be hashtag RUPEP. Okay, so RUPEP will be the hashtag for our session. So this is basically already what Ginny has mentioned about me, but I thought you'd like to see the cover of my new book. I'm very excited about it, very proud that it's just out. And although I've been blogging and had a website for some time, I really thought it'd be fun to do a website or a blog specifically for this book, and I will show that to you in a little bit. But first, just a little bit of context, okay, about social media and its academic use. Well, we know that 1/5 of American adults are online almost constantly. And when I say almost constantly, this is some new research by the Pew Internet and American Life Project indicating that there's a significant portion of the population that is basically never logging off, okay? You know, they go to sleep, they wake up, they're back on, and this number jumps to 36% when you're talking about younger adults. So we're not just talking about internet use becoming folded into our everyday lives. We know that this is happening, but it's happening to a really pronounced effect. 3/4 of American adults are online every day, and 2/3 of American adults are using social media daily, okay? This is daily, frequent, regular use of social media among people who, again, are almost continuously connected on the internet and digital media. So these media, whether they're digital or, so say texting is digital media, right? Social media, and having it on our phones, having it somewhere where we can portably connect with other people is truly becoming indispensable in so many aspects of our lives, right? Certainly for engaging with one another, for academics to engage with the publics whom they are doing research on behalf of and teaching and living with and living in communities with. It's becoming increasingly popular and useful, we're going to argue here today in this panel, to engage with other academics, to document events, to document conferences, to document talks. I use it a lot in the classroom, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that, how I document my classroom activities on Twitter with a hashtag and sometimes with other social media as well. We use these media to curate and to bring together and organize news and facts and ideas and to be able to showcase them in kind of social media galleries. And I know Joyce Valenza will be talking a lot about that. To tell digital stories, to use these media to talk and really tell stories about our lives, about what we're seeing, about what we're interested in, even about ourselves. And importantly, to drive traffic to your academic writing and your work, because this is where people are talking. So this is where we can get together and really, push out information about our more academic work that not everybody might find or that not everybody might read, okay? More people might encounter it through social media. So these are becoming increasingly indispensable uses, I think, of these technologies. Some of the specifically academic uses of blogging and social media, many of which, again, we'll be talking about today. Networking with other professionals, research development, finding out what's going on in the field and hearing about it before it turns up in a professional paper. And, at some level, sometimes being able to discuss the research while it's in progress, to say, hey, here's what I'm working on, here's what I'm talking about. So collaboration at many levels, right, at the early level of a project. Mid-level, when something's about to come out, when it's just come out. And we've all been frustrated as academics for how long this process can take. But when you're blogging or you're on social media during the process, it becomes, a conversation. It becomes enriching, and it really helps, deal with this time lag that sometimes can be quite, extensive. Certainly for information gathering, right, just to be finding out through news sites, through academic sites, educational sites, through the people whom you're studying in many cases. We can also study them on social media. So just gathering information in general it has become so much easier with these technologies. And disseminating information as well. Again, both with academics and with the general public, getting our work out there to those people whom we are, pledged to serve, really. Analytics, how well are your ideas getting out there? How far? Who's seeing them? Who's reading this stuff? Who has, encountered these ideas? Who's encountered your work and who has not? So to be able to just analyze, gather data and analyze is possible, is trackable via social media as opposed to more casual face-to-face means. So that's another, I think, really valuable use. As I said, I use teaching. I use social media in teaching all the time. All of my classes, whether they're online or not, even a traditional face-to-face class, I bring into the digital sphere to the extent that I can. I have every class run a class hashtag, a very simple way to bring together ideas, to bring together study groups for groups of students to study together, to talk about course ideas when they're not in the classroom. And you almost get a sense of the classroom walls breaking down. And again, this can even be with a regular face-to-face class. It doesn't have to have an explicitly online focus. But the idea that, students are just, energized by the idea of being in the classroom space, even if they're not in the room. They're thinking about the idea. One student said to me, it's like it's in the back of my mind all the time. And when he said that to me, I thought, gosh, isn't that like what most of us want for our teaching, right? That's one of those lofty goals about learning, that we want them to always be learning. And of course, that always seems sort of lofty. And I think with use of social media, and especially Twitter in the classroom, you can really see some of that come to fruition. You can see students in a more regular, almost daily way start to engage with course ideas. I even use my class hashtag to have students engage with course authors. So they're not only talking to one another, they're talking to other interested people out there in the world. And we can talk more about this during the Q&A if you want to. But this is something that I've really found to be valuable. And it also lends an element of fun to the classroom experience because, we're meeting students where they are when we're on social media. And although they're certainly far from experts in social media, and we don't have to be experts either, we're all learning, we're meeting them on their turf. The learning management system that we have is sometimes, clunky, or students just think it's, it's not inviting, and it's something it immediately feels formal when they go to the course management system. But the Twitter app, which is on their phone, that has, some kind of cool ideas being passed around in between classes, and then a course author jumps on and says, oh, here's what I really mean by that. And now they're talking directly to course authors. These are some really exciting uses of Twitter and other social media in the classroom. Twitter's my favorite for teaching, but there are others that can be used as well. And again, just branding is kind of one of these sort of buzzwords. Maybe a lot of us sometimes shy away from. It sounds so market-oriented. It sounds so ad agency. But in the modern digital age, we're all really, to some extent, we all know that our identities are always being expressed and created. And now it's happening publicly, and it's happening via social media. And so there's an element of branding to our social media efforts, but I think we can always put a positive spin on that and say, this is how we're sharing who we are, talking about who we are, connecting with other like-minded people. And that happens through this idea, I think, of branding ourselves on social media. So it's not always easy to think in those terms. Some people are more comfortable than others, but I've started to embrace it as just another kind of fun, interesting, creative aspect of being on social media. And finally, I think community almost encompasses everything I've been talking about here. Building community, in the classroom, among academics, with people who are at institutions whom you might otherwise never really get to see or know, but who you're talking to or at least seeing what they're doing on social media fairly often. And now you feel like you really do know these people, and it's an addition to your relationships. And then when you actually meet them face to face, you feel like you've already gone through several of the early stages of relationship building, because that's all happened online. I'm not going to read these. These are just some of the social media or blog platforms and sites that are important for academics. As Joyce Valenza was reminding me when I asked her for suggestions, she said it's not really always about the platform, it's about the genre. It's about the bucket that these kinds of platforms can be in. So it's not necessarily you need to do all of these or be an expert in all of these, but to understand the genres and the uses of these kinds of platforms, I think is useful, and that's certainly why we're doing this session here. So these are useful in various ways, but some of them will be covered later, so I'm not going to go into that right now. So I want to show you a little bit just about what I do, okay? And And I won't take too much time here, but I'd actually like to go directly to the sites, which I have. So this is my website, marychayko.com. It's on WordPress. I built it myself during a summer, in August probably I took to build it myself. I'm not particularly techie. I don't think, super design-oriented, but this is just something I really felt would bring together all the different aspects of my scholarship and, again, of my identity. And I wanted a place to bring all these different things together. So I developed this site on WordPress. It's one of the cheap, what are they called? The platforms within WordPress. It's one of the cheap themes, okay? The Mystique theme. I think it's a free theme. It's not one I spent a lot of money for. There are certainly people who will develop a beautiful website for you. I mean, I think mine's attractive enough, but I didn't spend money on this, okay? I built the little top header in Picasa. I just figured out how to put some pictures and words together. I wanted, because I do write books, I wanted to be able to have a website with different sidebars. So along the left-hand sidebar, you see my books. And, you can click on the book and order it. I thought that'd be useful, too. My Twitter feed is on the right. A good thing about having a Twitter feed encoded on your site is that it is always going to be populated with new material and new activities. As long as you're on Twitter and tweeting things out, it's going to give new content to the site. So I'm not one of these people who updates it as frequently as, others you'll see. But it gets sort of automatically updated by my Twitter feed, constantly being something that I contribute to. So there's a little welcome on my front page. It talks about me, just, show a couple photos of my family. I really believe that although we're blogging as professionals, we're people. And the line between professional and personal, it's kind of a tricky one sometimes to navigate, but I believe to the extent possible, my brand or my identity, whatever it is to be a professional person who also is, a human being and likes to talk about her family and likes to talk about her life a little bit, which is why on the website, although I include a page on my teaching, so a little bit just about my philosophy of teaching and some of the courses that I teach. I think another way of looking at this is almost like a little resume come to life, right? There's my teaching. Here's a statement of my research. You see the web address URL in case you ever want to go to it yourself. Statement on my research, the work that I do. My writing beyond the books. The books is up top. My new book and some of the other articles I've written, including more popular pieces. Here, talks I've given. I try to sprinkle in some photos because, it's a visual medium and I want people to get a sense of what I do. There are some YouTube videos of a keynote I gave. And I don't always include the video. Again, I don't build this up to the extent that others might, but it's something I really do want people to be able to find and go to one place and get a sense of my career. Here I include a selection of some of my media appearances. This is just for fun. I'm also a musician. I have a little band, which isn't much of a band since we all live in various places across the country, so we don't get together and play very often, except for at the conference, the Association for Humanist Sociology, which is a small sort of social justice for sociologists organization, and that's who my friends are. But we've recorded a CD because you don't need to be together in the digital age to record together, so we've tracked it, and I've actually got some of the songs there. I should play just a tiny little piece of one of them. Just a piece. Oh, the audio's not up. Okay, that's just as well. But you can go to the website, listen to my music. Again, it's who I am, right? It's a personal, human aspect of it. Wasn't necessary for my professional purposes, but it's fun for me, and I don't think hurts anything. Some contact information on the side, and then there's a link where you can click over to my blog. Okay, and this is the blog just for my book. I decided to start a blog. To talk about some of the issues, to get out interest of my book. Here's what this looks like. Some posts on some of my larger ideas. Some reviews are up there. And then one of the last things I want to show you is that I decided to, because I'm from radio, as Jenny mentioned, I decided to record some podcasts, and I recorded them professionally. I went into a radio station, I went to a studio and recorded them professionally because that was important to me. So for every chapter of the book, and again, this is just another way, all this is just different ways for people to approach material. And so for every chapter, I recorded a podcast, and it's just got the visual of the book. It's just audio. There's nothing visual about the podcast. And there are little 5-minute overviews of each chapter, which gives an idea of some of the major themes of the chapter, and also a short excerpt from the chapter. And again, this is just something I wanted to do, something I thought would set me apart from everybody else who isn't a former radio announcer that also writes these books, right? So it's sort of like my value that I can add. So I included them on a page. And otherwise, table of contents about the book. It's a fairly straightforward blog. I'm hoping to add much more content as the book just came out 2 weeks ago. So as I do different things with it, I'll place that on the blog, as I do talks, for example. And then I just want to show you my Twitter presence really, really quickly. I'm at Mary Chayko. I've been on Twitter, I guess, 4 or 5 years. This is the conference I was at this morning. Again, I like to document what's happening. I like to talk about what I'm doing. But most of what you'll see in my Twitter account is me tweeting with my students, okay? My students and I, again, we run hashtags. Here's the hashtag for one of my courses, RU297. The course is called Digital Technology and Disruptive Change. And you'll get a sense of how we're just always talking about, we're always talking about course issues. And the students talk to one another. And they talk to experts in the field. They talk to, we were just reading the work of a tech writer named Jathan Sadowski, who's a PhD student. And let's see if I can find some of those tweets. And students were tweeting back and forth with him because he indicated his interest to talk to students. Incidentally, I find that academics are generally fairly interested. It's not that hard to get many academics to tweet with my students because it's a pretty quick, easy, efficient way to talk to students. It's contained. It's it's usually not too extensive. So I certainly wouldn't just throw tweets at somebody who I didn't set this up ahead of time. But I'll often go to a course author and say, hey, my students are reading your work. Okay, so here's Barry Wellman, who's the writer of the book that my students are reading called Networked, talking to a student. And if I can get just one of these others. As you can see, it's really extensive. This is all just in the last day. This is all in the last 24 hours. These students just chatting and talking. And, as I come across new ideas, which couldn't have gone into the syllabus because things are being published all the time, put it on the hashtag, engenders discussion. And then, because, the course I'm teaching now is hybrid. It's half in the classroom and half online. We'll go back into the classroom and talk about what transpired on the hashtag. And it just, kind of builds up more and more. Should I wrap up? Okay, yes, I will. So let me just find this one tweet, an example of what I'm talking about. And even if I do an activity, I did a cross-course hashtag activity. I asked instructors who are teaching courses similar to mine at other universities to join a big hashtag. We called it TXC16, Twitter Cross Course 16. And we read some of the same articles, and we talked about this again with students from other universities. Like, how could you do that without social media, right? And then in this hashtag, you see students talk about themselves and talk about branding and giving advice to one another, and it just kind of goes on and on. So I'll stop here because I know there's so many interesting things to come. But certainly in the Q&A, if any aspect of this has resonated with you or it's something that you'd like to discuss further, please do so. And thank you very much for your time today.
Mayor, that was as rich and textured as your CV reads. Thank you. Jessie. Jessie Daniels, one thing that really jumps at me when I read her bio is that Forbes named her, quote, one of 20 inspiring women to follow on Twitter. That's quite something. And she can be found there as at Jessie Jessie, NYC. Okay? But she's a professor of sociology at Hunter and the Graduate Center at CUNY. And she's authored 5 books, including Being a Scholar in the Digital Era and Cyber Racism, along with dozens of articles. Jessie?
Thank you all for having me. I'm delighted to be here today, and Mary is a hard act to follow, as I knew she would be. That was very inspiring, and I have always wanted to be in a band, so we'll talk later. Okay, so the title of my talk today is Using Twitter for Scholarly Public Engagement, and I just want to jump right in. That's my Twitter handle. If you want to talk about more of this later, we can always discuss it on Twitter. It's one of my favorite things about it is we can make connection and discuss more there. So are academics using Twitter? Well, as it turns out, we are. Apparently, academics really love Twitter. The most recent data I could find is from 2012, and one estimate by Jason Preem is that 1 in 40 academics are using Twitter. It must be much higher by now, 4 years later in internet time. Another bit of data from Deborah Lupton, who has a 2014 book called Digital Sociology. In her analysis, she found that 90% of the academics that she interviewed are using Twitter for their scholarly work. So not just following Justin Bieber or whoever on Twitter, but using it really for academic work. And what we're finding now, this was something that Mary and I witnessed at the conference we were at recently in Boston. A lot of sociologists and other scholars are not only engaging in the ways that Mary suggested in her talk with Twitter, but they're actually studying Twitter. And there are a lot of reasons for this. One of the most important reasons has to do with the infrastructure of Twitter, which is that the API technical aspect of it is open to a certain extent, and so it's easy to scrape the data from Twitter. And so right now the estimates are, by 2014, the estimates were that there were something like 2,000 academic articles written about Twitter and something like 3,000 academic conference papers about Twitter. So not only are academics using Twitter, but we're fascinated by it as an object of study. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why we might use Twitter. And my argument is that we want to think about using Twitter as a way of opening up knowledge production. Some of you, I'm sure, saw this op-ed, which got a lot of controversy started by Nick Kristof back in February of 2014, where he said, "Professors, we need you." His argument was that there are these dire social problems out there, and professors are mostly irrelevant. Academics are irrelevant to these pressing social debates about pressing social issues. And part of the problem he identified really was with scholarly publishing. He said that academics seeking tenure must encode their insights in turgid prose hidden in obscure journals that keep readers at a distance, sort of a paraphrase of Kristof. More elegantly, Jill Lepore, a historian who also writes for The New Yorker, said, most academic writing is like a great heaping mountain of exquisite knowledge surrounded by a vast moat of dreadful prose. So we're not doing a lot that's right in terms of our writing and getting our message out as academics in terms of what we're studying to a wider public. And there's a lot of evidence that academic publishing is broken in various ways. I talk about this in a couple of books that I have coming out right now, but one of the things that's I think of as kind of a tragedy of the academic world right now is that we spend years working on research, we write it up, we publish it in journals that are then locked behind paywalls. There's one researcher that's even gone so far in the UK as to argue that locking your work behind paywalls is immoral. I'm not sure that I'm quite there, but I'm persuaded by the argument in some ways. There's a wonderful book by Peter Suberg, which itself is available open access from MIT Press. I encourage you to read that if you're new to the issues about why we should publish work that's accessible to a wide audience. But Twitter and really digital media writ large is changing this sort of economic, it's sort of ecosystem of scholarly publishing. In another era, in the era in which I went to graduate school, I finished my PhD in 1993, and sort of going back decades before that, The idea with scholarly writing was that it was produced in this kind of scarce economy. It was difficult to create and difficult to publish and difficult to access. And the rise of digital media technologies has really utterly transformed that equation. Now it's easier to publish, there's more writing happening, and it's easier to access. And what this means really, what I'm really fascinated by, is how this is changing the production of scholarly knowledge. So this is just one way that I've thought about conceptualizing this. This includes some of the uses of digital media that Mary mentioned in her presentation, but it's really the way that, one of those, I know that dialogue has an E on the end of it. One of the ways that I think about Twitter is that it really is this kind of ongoing sort of circle of knowledge of different ways of connecting with people, dialoguing with people, creating new knowledge, sharing knowledge that I've created, critiquing it with other people, and then learning from other people. So I'm going to take you through some of the aspects of this in really specific ways. One of the ways that people are connecting through Twitter is through hashtags that connect scholars across geographically distributed regions. So one of the most prominent hashtags going right now is called Scholar Sunday. And I'm going to forget the gentleman's name that started it. But this is started by one scholar, and he wanted to connect other scholars who were doing prominent work. And so he will tweet out, here's somebody doing work on this topic, you should follow them. And people are finding each other, academics are finding each other through this hashtag. Part of the way that scholarly publishing is changing is connected to Twitter, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that and give you a really specific example from my work. So in 2014, I think I wrote this, maybe 13, I wrote an article about I wrote a blog post about the process of getting from a tweet to an article, and I just want to share with you what that process was like. So I was at the American Sociological Association, the big national meeting in Atlanta in 2010, and I was going to, the way the association is organized, all the sessions about the internet are organized together, and then all the sessions about race or racism are organized together. And I was sitting in all those internet sessions, and my background is as a scholar of race and racism, and I was sitting there listening to all this discussion about online discourse, and I said, I'm still waiting for someone to mention race or racism in online discourse. So far, not so much. And this was just kind of a cranky at-a-conference tweet, and the only session that I saw that did this was a session that I had organized. And so I left that conference with sort of a bee in my bonnet, if you will, about this kind of missing area of research that I thought needed to be going on. So I went home, and I have a blog. I started a blog back in 2007 with Joe Fagan, who was my former dissertation advisor years ago, also a scholar of race and racism. The blog is called Racism Review, and if you have a blog that you maintain regularly, you know that it needs content, and so I thought, oh, here's a great idea for a blog post. I went home from that conference, and I wrote a post about the 10 things I thought sociologists should be researching about race and racism online. And I realized that it wasn't just people were researching these topics, it just wasn't happening in sociology. So I did this sort of top 10 list and then tweeted that out because I had created something and wanted to share it. And then I went back to those 10 items I had articulated and took each one of those and did a deeper dive on the literature about what the research was on that topic. So one of the ones I said we should be researching as sociologists was how housing, finding a place to live, was being changed by the internet. So the Civil Rights Act of the 1964-1965 outlawed discrimination in housing, racial discrimination in housing, but a lot of the places like Craigslist and other ways of finding a place to live online are subverting those civil rights laws. So I thought that's another place that people should be doing research. In a lot of ways, I think about these blog posts as first drafts of research, right? Here's what I'm thinking about. What do you think? And part of what I did when I would tweet these out is I would ask people, are you doing research in this area? What did I miss? Have you read research in this area? What did I miss, right? So I'm doing this big survey of the literature. Tell me what I'm missing. And it creates a kind of open, pre-publication peer review, where people are saying you've totally missed the boat on this, or yes, you're on the right track here, or I can't believe you didn't cite me or my favorite scholar about this issue. And then people also incorporated, this is just a comment from our blog, people also incorporated the work into their teaching. Here's something that my students said about what you're writing. Along about this time, when I was writing this series of 10 posts about what was going on in the research world around race and racism and the internet, I saw a call for papers at New Media and Society, and they were doing a special anniversary issue of 15 years in internet studies. And I was like, oh, funny, I just reviewed all the literature in this area. And so I submitted an article. I went back and collected all those 10 posts. I revised it. I put more context and more critique into it. And that eventually became this article in New Media and Society called Race and Racism in Internet Studies, a Review and Critique. And this has already been downloaded and widely cited. And then I tweeted about the article that I had written, right? So it's this kind of circular way of thinking about knowledge production in which digital media is not simply a way to disseminate something that I've done over here outside of digital media, but it's very much a part of how I'm thinking. And so part of the question that I want to know, too, is did my work reach anyone? And increasingly, traditional peer-reviewed journals have ways to share articles that have been published through Twitter. If the author's not doing it on their own, other people can do it. What we know is that sharing articles on social media increases how much they're cited in traditional peer-reviewed articles. So we know that the impact, if you will, of research is increased by sharing it on social media. And when papers are available open access, this also increases how often they're shared on Twitter and then how often they're cited in the peer-reviewed literature. It's very common that I will share things on Twitter, like share other things I'm reading, other people's work. And I started doing this a while ago, and people who are not affiliated with academic institutions would come back at me and sort of say, hey, I can't access that because I don't have an academic affiliation. Do you have $35 for me to download this article? And so I started adding a hashtag paywall so that just when people would know that I was tweeting something that was behind a paywall, so they would know. So this gets us back to this sort of circular way of thinking about knowledge production with digital media. And I think that we often may have a misconception that Twitter and other forms of social media are sort of like broadcast media, that we're just going to, oh, I have a new book and here it is, and it's just going to go out. And it doesn't work that way. It's much more of a kind of conversation and an ongoing process. So I have more resources. I've done workshops with people on how to use Twitter for academics, and I have a ton of resources stashed at this shared document. You're welcome to take a look at it and read way more about this subject than you ever thought possible. And then sometime in early 2017, Arlene Stein, a professor here at Rutgers in sociology, and I have a book coming out called Going Public, a Guide for Social Scientists, that talks more about writing for public audiences and how to use digital media. So thanks very much. See you on the Twitter.
Thank you, Jessie. That was totally on target in terms of what we're trying to accomplish in this program. And hearing about it through your considerable experience was really wonderful and clarifying. Joyce Valenza is an assistant teaching professor at Rutgers School of Communication and Information. She's also been at school, public, reference, and special librarian. For 10 years, Joyce was the Tech Life at School columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer. She is the author of Social Media Curation and several other titles for the American Library Association editions. And she's been awarded an American AASL Highsmith Research Grant and is currently working with the IMLS grant to explore credibility decisions among young searchers. Her Twitter chat, you're going to have to explain that one. It's complicated for me. And her blog have been honored with EduBlogs Awards. She tweets at Joyce Valenza. It's really amazing to me that people who are engaged in this kind of work are extremely versatile and not afraid to cross boundaries. I think there's something about that personality characteristic or way one approaches the world that generates this kind of thinking, which is very innovative, I think. Okay, Joyce, you're one of them.
Thanks so much. Let me see if I can bring this up. Well, thanks. Jessie, we're going to have a lot of resonance, I think, and also with Mary. But I really don't know that I'm crossing any boundaries. I don't see any boundaries anymore. And I think that, as Mary says, my life is hyper-connected. And all of these things kind of feed into each other. There's a dialogue that I'm having with myself as well as with the professional community. So this afternoon I want to talk about some verbs that have become dear to me, and also not only about building my presence as a scholar, which is a little more limited than my other presences, but as building my digital presence or my social media presence as a professional and as a human. And so that's what I would like to talk about today. You can find me in these various spaces, and this slide will come around again if you miss it the first time. I'm easy to find. These are some of the things that I've been doing relating to social media. Talking about business cards, I don't carry any more business cards. I don't have a Rolodex. I think there's a lot of things that used to be on our desk that have disappeared. And so, although this interface has changed just last week because it was bought by somebody else, About Me is a place where it's my signature. And if you want to find anything about me, if you want my CV, if you want anything else, this is on the bottom of my email sig, but everything in my life is connected by one link or another. I don't have to change my website. I just have to change that virtual business card, and you can find me. So if you discover there's some nasty things about me online, and likely there are, what I'm doing by this is pushing the good stuff to your lens. So as soon as you get an email from me, you see my About Me page, and you're likely to Google me if you're really interested, but I'll push you to the stuff I want you to discover through this. I believe that in a network world, we are our content, and we also are our connections. That you or somebody else's critical weak tie, that someone else is your critical weak tie, that you can scan, curate, interpret, create meaningful content for others. You can bridge connections among professionals and scholars. You can find and get what you need if you plan for it. Just going back a little bit, I want to talk about how my journey started online. And I'm very old, so it started a long time ago. I was writing in the mid-'90s. I was writing the Tech Life column, as Ginny was talking about, for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I can't even believe how primitive this stuff looks right now. But the notion, I was so excited about some of these things. The idea that grandparents could connect with grandchildren remotely online just made me so happy. And then I had to actually go into the Wayback Machine to actually find any digital evidence of what I'd written back in the 90s, and this is not the way it would look today. I could find stuff more easily if I'd been publishing more recently, and I had been. This is my first website that my students and I created, and it's actually the best website I ever made. It was in 1996, before libraries had websites, and I asked some kids who knew HTML to help me hot link an image map. And what we really did here is something that I later researched and discovered was smart. We created a schema for the web for children. And I still want to do a better job at this. But it also turned into the mom and pop candy store for the web. When I changed the interface, the kids went nuts because they said to me, Dr. V, we knew where the licorice was before you moved it. And so the schema became important to children. And then anybody ever watched the Dick Van Dyke Show, right? So when Mary moved the furniture, Dick tripped over the couch. And that's what happened when this interface was revealed in 2002, which I thought looked a little bit better. But the kids got angry because I changed it. And that won some awards because no one else was doing it. And I think the message here I also want, if there's no other message, it's about hitting the start button. Even if it's a primitive effort, there's so much you could, like the Sunday Scholar thing, Jessie, somebody just started it. And it became big and valuable. You can hit the start button for others so much more easily than we ever could before. So let's look at the start button and what it might help us with. It helps us with scale. In the past, I didn't have scale. Before there was a read-write web and when it's a read-only web, I really didn't have the scale to communicate. I didn't have the ability that I have now and that you all have to create, to contribute, and to share. So this is my blog, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it sucks. I share my heart, and sometimes I just share a review of an app. But every once in a while it hits a nerve, like a revised manifesto. When I saw people who were librarians who I thought should not be in our profession, I started writing a manifesto for modern practice. And that, in turn, got tweeted and shared, and all sorts of things started happening to it. When I felt that I had no focus, a couple of weeks ago, I wrote a belated confession. And that hit a nerve across social media in our small world that we called Library Land. And that really got spread. And it gave me some traction. And that was the most, the piece that I wrote that had the most sentiment related to it in Twitter. Twitter is now analyzed not just for its content, but how people feel about things. Very often I do a roundup, and a roundup is a good, like a list as a list as Jessie suggested, is a way to do a blog post. I mean, there's a lot of different kind of templates for this, but sometimes I do a roundup. In this case, the timelining tools got some traction, but notice the connectedness. If I want people to discover it, sometimes the editor will push it out, but very often when I get excited about it, I'll tweet it out, I'll put it on Facebook, I'll drive people to my blog. When I don't want anybody to discover it and I just have to blog, I probably won't tweet it. I also pick up on memes occasionally. I love Taylor Molley's poem, What Teachers Make. If you haven't heard it, hear it. So I did an homage to Taylor Molley when Dr. Bernstein in Long Island wanted to close libraries all over the place, and I did What Librarians Make. In turn, that got picked up as a meme in California, and the librarians took my poem and made a video of it, and then that spread. And so my impact in terms of my professional life has life not just because of what I put out, but what people do with what I put out, how they tell the story differently. Similarly, I put a Creative Commons attribution only on almost everything I do. And it's really easy. There's a wizard on Creative Commons that allows you to put the type of license you want on all of your work to tell other people how you want your work remixed or shared or not remixed or shared. So I put a license on this, and this was a really popular librarian infographic that got a lot of use. So sharing these infographics, in the past I'd put a poster on a wall. That has no traction. It makes no impact on the universe. Something like this does. My copyright-friendly toolkit, this is an old screenshot, but it had 12,000 views several years ago. And this is an instructional tool I created for a high school class that has been seen and shared very, very widely because people are confused about this stuff. And my TED Talk got shared an awful lot. It's about research, and I, if I had made a little talk like I'm making now, there's video of it now, but this actually got some traction, and I made friends outside of the library world in a big way. In my teaching, I exploit social media to death. I model social media. I've been teaching online since 2001. And when I reached the e-college interface that Rutgers had, I realized that nothing has changed since 2001. And so what's really important to me, if you can see that can opener, is that we open the can that we call the learning management system and allow learners to participate in ways that are authentic and meaningful and can have the capacity to change the world. And so I think there's a huge difference between online learning and networked learning. Among the things my students and I do is to curate. I did this little book for ALA last year, and as I interviewed people who are engaged in social media curation, a model emerged. People start by collecting, they continue by connecting, they begin to seriously curate, and you can see I've added words to each of these definitions, and finally they wind up contributing. And as they do that, there are collateral impacts. They're building social capital, although they don't start out wanting to. They're building an institutional or professional branding, and they're developing learning agility and some creativity in this. And I love what folks were talking about when they shared that. So what can you curate, and what types of, there's also genre of curation tools out there. One is called, in my language, the dashboard. And so I'm creating learning dashboards for my students. In some cases, they look like LibGuides because I'm a librarian. I don't think these are awfully pretty, but they really do an important job in guiding learners to what I want them to discover. But not only that, I'm also archiving the learning. So when my students share a poem, when they tell a digital story, all the artifacts of the learning are shared on my guides. It's not wasted. It's not thrown out when my virtual classroom gets ripped down at the end of a semester. It continues to live. And so I share my courses, although probably I would get in trouble for this, I don't know. My intellectual property is shared, my courses are shared. These are 3 of my courses that are out there for everybody to look at and possibly to use. And so I also create these other types of dashboards. So if you need a curation tool, or if you need to know what the digital storytelling tools or the image editing tools, I've got these dashboards that everybody can use, and I embed them pretty much everywhere. This is the index for my workflow life. And so you can see I've got my learning playlist, I've got curation tools, screencasting tools, presentation tools, and I remix all of these. These are not tools that are used individually, but I smash these up in a new type of workflow that I've been starting to call tool literacy. I use Pinterest in a big way. I recently had to do a marketing presentation for the American Library Association, and I studied how other organizations were marketing, and I put everything up on a Pinterest board so I could easily share it with folks, and I can continue to grow it as well. I'm also engaged in what Howard Jarkey calls personal knowledge management, and that phrase has a few different definitions. But in Jarkey's sense, it's about curation through seeking, sensing, and sharing. And personal knowledge management is more personal than the curation that I do for others, of course. So when I go to the hairdresser, I bring my iPad with me, and I want her to know that these are the curly hairstyles that are on my board. I don't want her to do anything else. I want to point to this. And I think every hairdresser in America, and probably any part of the world that has access to Pinterest or anything like this, ought to have this as a resume for color and cut from 360 degrees. This is my personal opinion. We also curate for current awareness. And so in terms of keeping up with news, it's very different from the way we used to keep up with news. My personal method, and I think this is not something I share with the universe, but I curate on 5 topics using Scoop It. And what this does is it pushes an RSS feed of experts to me based on the words I established under the hood, the people I decided to make it follow. So every morning, on the topics of curation, on the topics of search, on the topic of transliteracy, and on the topics of virtual library school, I have new content that is fed to me. It's pushed to me. I do not need to pull anything to get it. And so that's a new type of current awareness. I create learning playlists, and I have my students create them as well. And so this is one tool I use called Lesson Paths, which I think is brilliant. And you can see, I'm going to be talking, as Jessie did, about altmetrics in a minute. But you can see this is for my my search course, but I also use them for my social media course. So I had playlists on all metrics and social research. But the future of search, which is a module that's coming up in next week, actually, the students are going to build their own playlist. So what is the one article on the future of search? It doesn't have to be an article. It could be a video. What is the most compelling? What is the best forecast? And let's put it together. And then let's grab the embed code and put it wherever we want to, and let's be proud of it. My reading lists are also put together on social media. I discovered long ago that nobody read my reading lists when I didn't. And now all of these images are linked to Goodread reviews, and so they're crowdsourced reviews. And so when my students need to make a decision about which book they read, they've got a gallery to choose from. And they are welcome to, this is an open Pinterest board, so they're welcome to add titles to the gallery. So the other thing we do is we go on safaris. Instead of bringing back animal skins, we bring back websites and stuff. And so when I had my school library management students look for beautiful design ideas for our facilities module, they were able to pin their best ideas. So now we have a design board that all my students can use even if they've graduated and they want to come back. And we have safaris on so many things, on annual reports and stuff like that. Another type of playlist is my YouTube playlist. I've interviewed people all over the world on what they think search looks like, that big elephant that we call search. What does it look like to academics? What does it look like to SEO experts? What does it look like to elementary teachers, to database vendors and publishers? And I've gotten all of these voices that supplement our textbook. And my students love these. And then they comment on these in the CAN that we call the Learning Management System. And everything I do is pretty much on Google Drive. So you can see my lectures are there, my recorded lectures, my assessments, the activities. The class directory is all connected there. Are you guys okay? Yeah, okay. I don't want you. So another thing that this is all about is, of course, is building community and connecting. I read Seth Godin's Tribes several years ago, and although it was a little book, and although it might not have had the depth of scholarship that would impress this particular group, it was it hit a switch for me. It opened me up to realize we had a tribe, but they didn't know they were a tribe yet. Or I could start a tribe. And imagine, as I'm talking, I want you to think about the tribes that you belong to that may not even know that you're going to be their leader and that you're going to hit the start button and you're going to move them forward. All a group needs to be a tribe, according to Godin, is a shared interest and a way to communicate. Everything is out there. All you need to do is hit the start button. You be the leader. Don't wait for somebody else to do it. And so a while back, this was in 2010, I decided to start the TL Chat hashtag. That's become the default hashtag for my profession. After that, we talk about live chat, and that's an hour each week or each month where we use the hashtag, we develop a question and answer kind of approach, and we talk about an important issue, and that's all archived. So, and you can see, if you can see, there's this tiny little thing where it says Q1, Q2, Q3, and then the people answer in the protocol A1, so you see what matches. And you really can have an international discussion around any issue using a live Twitter chat. Participate.com in the world of education is one place where you can find out where all the live Twitter chats are happening. And then, this I'm going to skip, but and then my students decided, well, if Joyce can do it, why can't we do it? And so they realized that there was no chat for elementary librarians. So then I had 2 students start TLLM, which is now a thing. And so they were students and they didn't think they had the power. And then when people compile lists of hashtags, it makes you kind of proud when your hashtag gets on their word clouds. So that's kind of fun. This is Participate. I also moderate Google Plus communities. People tell me they're disappearing, but they are so fabulous for community engagement. And so the conversations, so when they need their projects peer-reviewed, they don't post them in the learning management system. They put them up on the Google Plus community so that they can have a little mini threaded discussion publicly or privately, depending upon what we decide to make the class. they can also use hashtags on any of their posts, so then they can go back and search the community, because hashtags are really search tools. So then this is also our class directory. So in a threaded discussion, you lose the beauty of the question, who are you? But if everybody gets a Google slide in a Google slide deck or more, they can put up pictures of their dogs and cats or links to stuff, and you can embed this anywhere, so it's available. And if anybody wants to say, I need a partner for this project, they can kind of flip through this type of Rolodex instead and make the discovery of a partner. I use TweetDeck to manage my professional life and my teaching, and as Mary has with her classes, my classes have hashtags. Some are more active than others, but I can kind of monitor this from this big dashboard that's called TweetDeck. I think I'm going to, I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to probably, am I okay? Yeah. Because of Twitter, my voice was heard all over the world in that little community of library land. And when I went to Australia to do a talk, there was a meetup of librarians in Perth. And we had breakfast together, and it was spontaneous. And then the educators and librarians this is a bridge. I often use the EdChat hashtag as well as the library chats, because I want to bridge communities. And so that was a separate event with my friend Gwyneth, but we spent another day at a winery in Perth with all of the educators who had been following the hashtag. And this again turned up spontaneously in Perth. My best friends professionally, I've met through hashtags. And it's not a virtual connection. And I skipped the Howard Rangel thing about the difference between a network and a community. It's a community. For me, it's a community. These are people I know and love. And if I discovered they were ill, I would be knocking on their door virtually. And that's the difference, Rangel tells us, between a network and a community. I remember to praise, credit, and thank, and I teach my students how important that is. It's a golden rule kind of thing on social media as well. And so you probably can't read this, but this is my Twitter timeline. And anytime a guest comes by, or I was in Arkansas and I got this little award from the Arkansas government, I was out there throwing those photographs and thanking my hosts. And in turn, that gives me a sense of my social capital. It helps me build. And then I like when people say something nice about me. I like it. I comment back. I don't take these things for granted. And when people visit my class, and this was my social media class, I encourage my students to tweet directly to them, to use our hashtag, and to thank the people whose wisdom has been shared and whose time we took. I use these things to amplify my professional voice, especially when I'm at conferences. So Storify is a kind of timeline digital storytelling tool where I can grab a tweet, I can grab a YouTube video, I can grab an Instagram photograph, and all I need to do is create this patchwork quilt in a time sequence, and I tell the story of a conference or an event, adding my own little narrative. So this is the story. This is better than a scrapbook. This isn't the story of my trip to Doha and my national conference, and I can continue to add to that. So that's Storify. I've started getting good at this, and so I became a member of what they call the Twitterati. And so I was invited to Washington to tweet a conference not long ago, and there was a red carpet, so I had a gown. Recently, I had the opportunity, this is like so geeky, but I was so excited. You see me with Yoda over there? Anybody know where that is? That's the Skywalker Ranch. That's George Lucas's house. But I got really excited when I was there, and it was all about open educational resources, open access material, and I started tweeting. And after a while, the White House started retweeting what I was tweeting. And so the Office of Educational Technology is a White House department. I think it's, not sure what they call it, but they are now following me. The OER Commons is now following me. Open Education Week is now following me. And so when I say something on behalf of my profession, it's not just my profession that notices it. I have a voice, and you have a voice. It's how you leverage that voice, how you build your social capital, and also how you crowdsource things. The thing is, you don't have to do any of this stuff alone. You really have to work hard to feel alone. So if I have a question I can't answer, for instance, in this case, I didn't know which was more popular. This is a really earth-shaking first world problem. But what's used more heavily, ALA or APA at the university level? So overnight, I put out this question, attached it to a Google form, and I got 300 responses overnight from the academics who were following the hashtags I used. I had a survey I could present my administrator with the next morning, and it depends is the answer, but I crowdsourced that question, as I do many. As I built that book on social media curation, I crowdsourced that survey, and it was so easy. When I want to get qualitative research, in fact, this one is on social capital. I asked a number of professionals what social capital meant to them, and everybody answered, and this is a wonderful tool called Flipgrid, which records 90-second responses. You can put a Flipgrid question link instead of in a survey, when you say other and leave a blank space, if people want to go directly to Flipgrid and give a 90-second response, you can do a qualitative data analysis on that video. You can transcribe it and use that. And so you're opening up a survey without borders into another medium. When I asked about women in ed tech, I got these wonderful responses on the stories of these women who are not librarians necessarily in the world of ed tech. I just presented that. I presented that last year in New Jersey, but I connected that, which was Flipgrid, with my Google Slides using Pear Deck, and so I was able to do the research using Flipgrid, but then I was also able to use the audience as a research tool. How many of you responded to this story and in what way? And Pear Deck gives me both qualitative and quantitative research. So I could grab all of these things as if they were tweets or a word cloud if people were giving me verbal responses. But I could also grab quantitative data because it turned itself into a bar chart. And so this is just another example of what it looks like when you use Pear Deck on top of your Google Slides. Social capital is reciprocal. The more you give, the more you get. All you have to do is ask. These are the guests that hang out with my classes just because they ask. I just put this little table out, and I ask all the professionals I know and love to sign in, and these are my classroom guests. When my students in the high school were reading Thousand Splendid Suns, I asked a women's rights activist to come. Soraya Paksad came in and talked about Sharia law in a way, via Skype, in a way that my students would never have had access to, had not. We invited authors in like crazy. Cory Doctorow came in, Libba Bray, Laurie Halls Anderson. I think the whole notion of social network analysis is important to keep in mind as we look at this, because you can be very strategic. For instance, which is the most important node, or which are the most important nodes in this diagram? Not rhetorical. Which one are you pointing to? Which one? This one? Right, it's that one. That's the bridge. That's the bridge. This is the weak tie. Everybody else is telling each other the same joke. The new joke comes in when this person reaches that person. The new knowledge happens when this person reaches that person. And on Twitter, the way you do that is simply by using a hashtag that is going to get you into a new network. You can easily study your connections. There's so many free tools. You can see where your reach is happening. You can see the other hashtags that are possible for you to use strategically. You can build a Twitter plan. What do I want to learn about? Who are the experts? Who are the thought leaders? You can think about, is your network diverse enough? Who are the bridges? Who will help you bridge your network? What are the important hashtags? Who are people following? Twitter lists. If you get a Twitter list of somebody you admire, see who they're following and see who's on their Twitter lists. Oh my God, that will build your network in a really powerful way. Okay. You can't build a network around the people you already love. You need to leave your walled garden, find communities, develop ties, reach out, and bridge. And this is the end, I promise. Consider new metrics and visit new playgrounds for scholarship. These are new places that scholars are playing. And unfortunately, there are too many of them, and I'm not going to say which ones are the best ones, but this in itself, it's designed to create community, but what it's really creating in some ways is silos, because people are making choices. And I find myself joining everything, and then I get really a mess. Google Scholar is another place where you can develop an academic scholarship profile. And if people are going to discover you there through the Google Scholar search and then click on your name, you'd probably want to have a profile that will result from that click. Altmetrics is, how many of you know about the altmetrics movement? Okay. Altmetrics is a new way to measure impact of your research. And I know Jessie mentioned Jason Preem. This is the tweet in which he decided on the term. I like the term article level metrics, but it fails to imply the diversity of measures. And lately he suggested the term altmetrics. And so what's important, we used to measure bibliometrics, how many times things were cited and by whom. But what altmetrics is suggesting is that what about the tweets about your research, your presentations, your publications? What about the blog posts about them? What about the comments on your own blog? What about the videos or the TED Talks? What about the infographics that are developed from your research? What about the visits to your CV and where it's posted? What about your slide shares or your LinkedIn slides and how many times they're viewed? Are viewings different from downloads? Do downloads imply a larger commitment to the reading? Collaborations that you develop on Mendeley, sharing on Bibsonomy, how many followers you have, how many bookmarks are made to your stuff, how many likes and favorites and shares and clicks and ratings. Does that count for anything in the worlds of tenure and promotion? I don't have the answer, but I think it might. And I think it might, at very least, lead some people back to your articles. And there's a lot of stuff that I've got about here. But one measure that it would be interesting to know about is this donut. How many of you have seen the donut? Yeah. So this donut is an altmetric, and this is owned by Macmillan. There's a bunch of different people who are measuring things in different ways. But the colors in your donuts and those numbers are a measure of your research impact beyond bibliometrics. Impact story is one that I think Jason Preem started, and this is a different type of measurement. Okay, so now I'm getting towards my end. So there are some old rules that have to do with the golden rule, but then I think we've got some new rules, and those new rules involve the verbs that I shared with you today: curate, mentor, reciprocate, and some of these were implied: crowdsource, amplify. But I think the big thing is you can hit the start button. You don't need to hit it in a very big way. You can hit it gently, and I think you can make impact through that gentle push. So thank you, everyone, and that's my contact stuff.
Wow. So we have several members of the Twitterati here, and Joyce, your work is really incredible. It's encyclopedic and layered and collage-y. It's collage.
It's the way it's written now, though. It's not.
I know, but you have control of it, and maybe we can start the discussion any way you want. But
We can come up front.
yeah, why don't you move up front? And if you're using the mic in order for the video recording to pick up your voice, you have to press it to green, and when you're not using it, turn it off because it creates static. There you go.
Great. So odd, like all that you do, and how you do it, because you actually have full-time jobs on top of all of this, right? So, if someone really felt that they were totally sated, right, they had no time, but they wanted to do something, where should they start incrementally? And is this a scenario
Joyce said about just hitting the start button and starting anywhere and starting wherever you're familiar is really important.
Jessie,
I'm familiar with all of them. Like, which one would be low cost, high reward, relatively speaking?
are we supposed to hit this?
Yes.
Am I on? If I, yeah. No.
Okay, so what I don't think, I think lurking has a negative connotation, but
Oh, lurking has a negative connotation, but it's not. I mean, just trying to figure out what are the hashtags for your particular group in sociology, for instance, and then just following it, using it as a search tool, waking up in the morning and say, let me check that hashtag. As you do that, you're going to discover people you may want to follow. You don't need to read your stream in Twitter. You don't need to even feel guilty about that. I think if you use Twitter as a search tool, as an entree into this world, you will discover scholars that you're going to want to follow and hashtags you're going to want to keep an eye on. So that's the easiest way, I think.
The easiest step if you want to start a presence, what out of all the various strategies that you focused on, are there any that you would recommend as kind of the first step to get out there?
To me, I think the very first place that I would recommend people start is may seem unusual, which is making sure that your research is available. So for a lot of people, I think they may not realize that they have an institutional repository. So you don't even have to use something like academia.edu, which has actually gotten some critiques lately. But just making sure that people can find your research if they want to through a search engine, I think is the first thing. And then after that, I might suggest Twitter, but honestly, it's not for everybody. I think that I think it's interesting that we have this evidence now that Twitter is becoming popular among academics because it's not that popular among the general population. Facebook actually is really popular among the general population, and the uptake of Twitter is still only about 7%. So it's still small, and I think that there's a way in which Twitter can be a real cognitive overload. And so I don't actually often recommend that people sort of start there. I mean, I think making your research available is the place to start. And then I think it's really helpful if you have a buddy, if you have somebody else in your life in real time who's also exploring things, just to even talk about. It's helpful to sit with somebody and look at social media as well. Like, what do you see here? What are you looking at? I think that's a way to get over the cognitive overload. But I also think it's useful to just talk with somebody about whatever. Did you see that thing on Twitter or whatever? And see what they're getting out of it. And that, I think, is helpful.
For me, for teaching, I just find Twitter so useful, and to reach students in real time and to be able to have hashtags and conversations in a way that's simple yet powerful. So if teaching is what you think you might use, that's my suggestion. And again, all the other affordances of Twitter that we've talked about. So I guess I do find it probably my first go-to place that I would recommend. So that's.
I think.
Green is on, blue is off.
Oh, green is on.
You have to press it. It's green. It's green when the light is picking up.
So is it picking up now?
Okay, so it's
But I think I've discovered what it is you want to do first. And do you want to share knowledge with the world? Do you want to gather things together? It's about the task at hand and the context of the task, and what is the, for instance, the tool that will allow you to do something that you want to do in a way that's new and maybe more powerful and easier to scale.
traditional ways that academics have interacted with one another, which can sometimes be a little bit more critical. And I mean, and to be fair, I mean, the academy is also about critical thinking and challenging the status quo and that kind of thing. So I guess if you can comment a little bit on how you think social media is having that broader impact on how academics communicate with one another, and is it a good thing or a bad thing, or just something different?
Can I take the second one, and then let Samantha take the first one? You know, for me, I mean, I think that's a great question about, you know, sort of the nastiness of academic life and how Twitter's changed it. And I have to say, for me personally, Twitter has totally transformed academic life in a particular kind of way, and especially academic conferences. So I don't know which conferences you attend, but in sociology, there, we used to talk about, this is going back 10 years or so ago, we used to talk about the badge face scan, where somebody would sort of look at your badge name and affiliation, and if you were no one from nowhere university, then it would be like they would need to look at your face. And there was something just sort of humiliating and demeaning about going through the conference that way, where it was this really impersonal sort of, you know, it's not even like a bar or something where you're dating. I mean, it's just like horrible. And what Twitter did, you know, that was academic conferences before Twitter, and then after Twitter, there was this kind of recognition of, oh, you're Jessie NYC, and we had a conversation about this article or about a shared interest, and you know, people academics that I didn't even know would be like, can I give you a hug? And it would be like, well, sure.
I did that to Jessie. I did that to Jessie in New York. I ran into her and I said, I knew her so well from Twitter that I felt like I really knew her, which I believe I did. And it, you know, again, it was like a shortcut to this. But then now we're professional colleagues. We run into each other all the time, face to face, whatever. We really knew each other even better.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt, but
No,
I was
no,
one of
that's,
those, like awkward hugging people.
No, it's. I mean, it's not awkward. It's just. It was just the first time it happened. It was like unexpected. I think is the thing. And now it's a commonplace. You know, it really is. And I think your description of you sort of fast forward through those layers of getting to know people. And I think that there is a way in which, at least among the people that I follow and am followed by, that there is a different ethic rather than being kind of vicious and biting. That said, I know that some people get attacked online, but it's not. I see that in around things like the whole Gamergate controversy, and there's a whole kind of way in which Black women are attacked online, but I don't see the kind of stuff I used to see at academic conferences happening on Twitter. I just don't see it. And I could be blind to it. It could be something about the way I've curated my followers and my experience of it, but I really think that it's one place that Twitter has made a positive difference.
I do think people who curate their list, their followers, and those who follow them, who are really not necessarily selective, but just careful, and they really, you know, they want to get value from the experience, and they're not just following everybody they can see. I don't think that really is very useful. I think you want to, it's a meaningful activity, it's an interpersonal activity. It doesn't need to be a waste of time on anybody's part. So I think when you do have that kind of sort of carefully curated group or tribe, as Joyce is talking about, you know, they really do become tribes and communities, and these are people who really feel that they know one another very well. And so then the ethic of how those people would interact translates to Twitter. So you're interacting in ways, you know, is it sometimes a little harsher? Yeah. But I think you can also, as Jessie says, sort of like develop an ethic of how you're all talking to one another, and then that sort of starts to carry along. So I think that can have almost anything that it becomes created to be. Given that you can also have outsiders come in and crash the party and make it a little bit negative. But I, you know, like Jessie, I haven't had that many of that negative experience because I'm sort of careful about who I follow and who I interact with, and I have, you know, I do it all, you know, really strategically, and I'm not just talking to anybody anytime or saying any kind of crap. You know, I'm really, it matters, and it's a professional / personal experience for me.
I don't have too much to add to that. My experience is that within our professional communities, we tend to police ourselves. Is there lively dialogue that can seem a little venomous occasionally when there's a hot topic? But this is really corny, but I don't ever post anything that I would be unproud of seeing later on. I think before I tweet,
request, but I require that of my students. And to me, that's a big part of the experience of doing this as part of, an educational dialogue, because my students, I have really strict social media rules. We talk about that for the first 3 weeks before we really start delving into it. I mean, I make sure they know that, I'm policing everything that goes online. After a while, I don't even need to, because I think once you set it up a certain way, it's going to continue. And again, I'm talking mostly undergraduates or whom I teach. But my social media policies state unequivocally that everyone will be positive online. This is not a place to complain or vent. It's an educational space, but it's also friendly and it's civil. And they have to be respectful. And then we also go into issues of accuracy and sensitivity, and it's really, there's quite a long list. It takes quite some time to discuss it, make sure that they're careful they sign it. It goes into the syllabus so that, if they break it, it's actually considered like, part of breaking the contract with the syllabus. But I think that's also part of the education that's going on with, traditional undergraduates are used to sometimes using their social media or their phones or their texting in more of a crude way, and I say, well, this is different. That's not what we're here for. That's not what we're doing. And then I really, I hope and I try to encourage that to carry over into being the best practice that they're using on their social media in general, because, again, you really never know how these things are going to follow you or destroy your reputation or, cause harm to somebody else or even hurt somebody's feelings inadvertent. To me, these are a lot of teachable moments that we can talk about with students. And again, you model that in your own behavior as well, so you try to reinforce it all the way around. But to me, it's a really important issue, and it's something that I'm absolutely adamant about with my students.
I just want to say quickly, though, I was actually trying to get at something on the other side. So I think it's wonderful that, setting up rules to ensure that the discussion is civil and not getting nasty. But I also get the sense that some of the norms on social media, like I heard about Facebook now, the norm is, you just give these outrageous compliments anytime anybody puts a picture up. And so are we also potentially suppressing good discussion and disagreement by reinforcing the nice too much? But I mean, how do we, I guess it's more about how do you achieve that balance so that you're encouraging people to continue to be critical without criticizing people?
I think the rules are the same no matter, whether you're face-to-face or online. If I disagree with you, I would do that respectfully. And I think within these communities, you're right. I mean, no growth will happen if all we're saying is, I like your picture. So, I hope that there's meaningful conversation. I'm hoping that there's give and take. I hope that there's dialogue. I hope there's positive criticism happening. In fact, that's what that peer review stuff is all about, though it's in a more controlled environment. But you don't need to be a troll to disagree with somebody. So, yeah.
So you are seeing that healthy dialogue going on. I
do. I mean, especially, I think especially in live Twitter chats when there is a controversial topic on the table and it's a focused conversation, and the conversation has an opportunity to grow beyond, a couple of people, and it's concentrated in a short time span. Then especially you do see the pushback and give and take.
Yeah, my work is on racism, and I also do stuff on sort of race and feminism, and there's a lot of controversy there that I'm just trying to think of how to characterize that. I mean, because like some of the writing that I've done is on white feminism and really critical of that and putting that on Twitter, and that's like, so what do people say that is critical? So a lot of people will push back on that and say you're whatever, you're part of the problem. What we need to do is just not talk about racism and it'll go away. So there is this way in which people are doing that kind of pushback in ways that are, sometimes helpful, sometimes not. Among scholars, I think that there is this kind of really high level of critical discussion going on that often leads to longer form posts. So I see that going on. And then the other thing, not to paint a too nice picture of Twitter, the other thing that goes on is there's this thing called subtweeting, which basically is, I grew up in the South, so it's really just being passive aggressive. But it's where you talk about somebody, but you don't link to them. And so you can sort of say, you know, there's a certain sociologist who's written an ethnography that I'm not a fan of, and everybody knows who you're talking about, right? And so, and then you link to the art of the piece on Salon that's really critical of that particular ethnography, right? So I mean, it's still going there, but there's a way in which it's like, well, I'm not going to get in, whatever, that person may not be on Twitter that I'm critical of, or I don't really want to get in their face about it. I just don't want to have an out with them on this platform, but I'm still very critical of this set of ideas and the way that they've done their work and that sort of thing. And just, I haven't forgotten your practical question. I have a lot of marketers that follow me too. Mostly, if they don't follow me, I just let them follow. And but if, you know, I sort of draw the line at porn followers or anybody that has nakedness in their avatar, and I just don't want to see that or hear about it, and so I block them. So I make good use of the block button.
So let me bring this conversation back to public engagement. And I have a question for you, Jessie. Let me get at this. There are 20 Forbes magazine, right, which is a mainstream magazine. Seems like a good inquirer if you want to have your work have kind of impact and be shared. And we've been talking about how do you get found, right? So you and 20 other women were found. Now, why do you think that is?
Well, it's a great question that I have no answer to. It was just a list that somebody created. I mean, you were on one of these lists as well.
You're on the list too.
Yeah. the
Not
30
that one. Yeah.
yeah, several. And it, you know, it's just somebody, like, it's the web needs content. People are always doing these articles that have lists, which are called listicles, and it's just a way to drive traffic. And I don't know why they found me among other people. I was early-ish on Twitter, and pretty active, and so I came to the top because I was having conversations with other people. So I think that's part of what happened there. But there's kind of no, you know, those kinds of lists are sort of a black box, and there's no knowing what goes on in there, except it's an author who curates a list. So I'm sorry I don't have the
Well, it's interesting.
science.
If academics get on that list, there can be more.
Mhm.
And I think, Joyce, you have this huge spectrum that you're getting. You are like a virtuoso in managing all this stuff. And that's what you do, right? So I can see how Joyce would end up. But you've been talking mostly about academic subject matters, right? Which is a little bit different.
Well, right, but the academic subject matters that I'm talking about are super connected to current events.
Okay.
And so that, I mean, it's not Gaelic poetry, you know, I mean, it's Ferguson and Black Lives Matter and, you know, kind of what's happening in current
Okay,
events.
so are people doing Twitter searches to find you guys? Is that what you're doing?
Well, part of what happens sometimes is that someone much more prominent will retweet something I said. So one time, I can't remember what it was, but I said something and DeRay McKesson retweeted me. And DeRay is somebody who's been profiled in the New York Times and as a leader in Black Lives Matter.
I see.
Problematic in various ways, but anyway. But he has a ton of followers, and so when he retweeted me and then Netta retweeted me, it was like, oh, then a lot of people found me that way. But that was actually way after the list. The list was early, so I don't know.
That's interesting.
But also remember, although we're academics, we're not just talking to other academics online, right? So we're on Twitter
Right.
with, journalists and tech writers and
Activists.
activists, sure. Students, people who just come across. So, and sometimes I think one of the kind of neat affordances of Twitter we haven't really talked about is the ability to sometimes just sort of eavesdrop on other things
Right.
that are happening and see conversations. And maybe you jump into one of them, but maybe you don't. You're just, kind of learning about this sort of little corner of the world that you wouldn't have even known. And people are stumbling upon one another that way as well.
Yeah, so related to something that you had said earlier about sort of opening up worlds and breaking down silos. I mean, I think it's one of the tremendous possibilities that Twitter and different kinds of social media do. It's like, for example, I discovered in doing some of my work around open access that like me and librarians, we like go together. It's just like, oh, you're the folks having this conversation, And so there's a kind of natural affinity there that without social media, I would never have known that. I just wouldn't have gotten it. And people found me, like librarians found me after cyber racism, because that whole thing on literacy and kind of, and it was just like, oh, I just never thought of that.
I mean, you can't go to every conference, right?
Right.
You can't attend physically everything that there is out there to go to. And sometimes as academics, we feel a little bit challenged or frustrated by that. Like, well, there's so much going on. Even at a conference, you can't see everything, right? You can't go to every session. And yet it is a kind of a space where all these ideas do then converge and where you do get to see what's going on in other places.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even have known to go to a library conference before.
Yeah,
and it's also generative, right? So one of the books I just finished, Being a Scholar in a Digital Era, is actually I co-wrote with the librarian at the GC because we had these ideas in common, and I had stuff and she had stuff, and it was really a conversation, that book, in a way, that really just wouldn't have been possible otherwise.
I like to think about it as one lovely salon or a cocktail party where people who wouldn't necessarily be in that same room or at that same party can actually mingle. And, it's through that connection of hashtags. And so my guess is that I tweeted about three of us this morning, a little while ago, and now that our names are connected, people in your network will find me, and people in my network will discover you, and you'll find more librarians who are fans. And so it's that whole notion of the bridges and the weak ties again. And the cocktail.
Or questions for each other. So how are you finding, have you found, because technology transitions more quickly as opposed to what's hot, what's not, what's being used, from early days of just having a website, maybe blogging, are you being able to manage maintaining that? And then as far as moving forward, sort of seeing what's coming down the line, how to transit, things like that. It's not just everyone, you should do this, you should do that.
Can I just say that I was sad that you skipped over the Howard Reingold slide, because Howard's a friend. Years ago, Howard Reingold, who's kind of I think of him as an honorary sociologist and an internet guru, said, I learn a new platform every day. And for me, it was like one of those kind of paradigm shifting moments, because I was sort of in that place where I'm like, oh my God, there's a new platform every day. What am I going to do? Or it's like, oh, right, there's just a new one all the time, and you're just always learning them. So one of the things that's true is that there are things about platforms that are the same. So it used to be, and I've been teaching a long time, that I used to have to teach students how to upload an image. And now it's like, no, just like on Facebook, I don't have to teach that anymore, right? Because we all know you click and attach and upload, right? Like, people know those steps, and they're kind of the same on different platforms. So the things that you learn on one platform are similar, not identical, but are similar on another platform. I think a lot about Twitter going away. I've been around, I worked in the internet industry in the 1990s, and I've seen, I had something on Diaryland, and there was Friendster, and there was Orkut. I've seen stuff come and go. And so I'm kind of wondering, given that Twitter's not making any money, if it's going to go away and what we're going to do then. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I don't worry, because I'll figure out whatever's next, And because I teach with digital media, I'm always learning stuff. And so for this semester, I'm having my students teach me, what's the tool you're